Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my lecture. So today we will continue our last lecture on public's choice. So we already discussed about the public's choice, like what are the characteristics and features about the public's choice, and what are the different situations, especially in the taxation situations, how individuals, different types of individuals like poor and rich and middle income groups, how they behave towards the public choice, and then they make their choices when taxation comes into place. And taxation, there we discussed about two different types of taxation. One is uniform, the other one that we discussed about the proportional taxation. So now today let us begin with highlighting few problems that are associated with public choice. So to begin with, the first one is preference revelations. As we already mentioned that it is very difficult, especially we don't get actual data or actual information about individuals' preferences on the elections or preferences over different types of goods or commodities that electoral candidates they promise for. And therefore this is one of the problems that we face in public choice theory. It's like preference revelations, although in terms of commodities which are they are promised to provide at the individual level by the electoral candidates, that might be sometimes some individuals may say that this particular commodities that is the required one, and therefore one can actually anticipate that one person or that particular individual person whom they have actually voted for, but not always it is possible. And therefore in our last lecture we had given the example of exit poll and the final result of the actual result of the elections. Sometimes there is a mismatch because it is preferences over the revelation of the choices that individual generally do not tend to share. The second set of problem that are associated with public choice is like aggregating preferences. Aggregating preferences is very difficult, and then I think we already know from the utility functions and utility characteristics and also individual indifference curves characteristics that different individuals have different preferred levels of public expenditure, and therefore different people will have their different tastes and preferences over certain commodities. For instance, individual 1 or A might be preferring more about the primary health care in their village as compared to say person B from the same village might be requiring for the primary education, for instance. So these are like even within the same cohort or within the homogeneous group, there will be difference in preferring one over another. And then second point, that preferred level depends on both individuals' income and the tax system, and we already discussed this in our last lecture, like how individuals' income sometimes income effect has a more stronger power, and then income effect only shows the shows the power for any individuals to make the decisions. Sometimes income effect doesn't play much role in the decision making process or choices when individual make any choice. For instance, substitution effects and income effects might go in the opposite direction, and then we discuss this in context of proportional taxation system. So in the taxation system also we discussed, like there are two ways that we discussed. One is uniform, like doesn't depend on the individual's income. Whatever the government expenditure is required, that will be treated as tax revenue, and then overall tax revenue will be divided by total number of populations of the household, and that's how everybody will be paying it. It's like say water taxes in the urban areas, and there are some certain taxes that are there which actually follows a uniform taxation system. The other one is say proportional taxation, where it varies with the different income group. Therefore, poor person, they are, as per their income they will pay the taxes. Even in a poor person, if his or her income increases, accordingly he or she will be paying more taxes. So, and there is a difference between poor income group, middle income group, and then rich person or high income group. They will pay different proportional taxes. So preferred level also depends and varies from individual's income, as well as in taxation, like the kind of taxes that they pay. So of course the other things, if we keep equal or constant, rich person typically prefer higher levels, because rich person is paying higher taxes, and therefore the expected outcome or expected sort of value or expected sort of kind of what a rich person is expecting from the public expenditures will be much higher as compared to say low income, poor persons or middle income groups. The fourth point in aggregating preferences when we have a problem is like the cost of increased public expenditure may be higher for the rich. So again, while aggregating all the preferences of all the groups of the people, where we see that different status are already there based on their economic classifications. Therefore, these are the issues that we always face when we talk about public choice theory, when we try to aggregate preferences and then try to make any public sort of policy. So that is it's absolutely impossible to aggregate preferences, and that has the limitations where we can't actually make it while framing public policy. So let's move to the next point, and that is majority voting, and this is also known as voting paradox or paradox of cyclical voting. So this is a French philosopher Nicolas de Condorcet actually highlighted in the votings, in context of votings. Sometimes it is not possible, and that is a major problem that pair-wise voting may lead to nowhere, and that becomes a paradox in the voting system. So let us take this example, and we can actually discuss what are we actually discussing here and what we mean by voting paradox. Assume that 3 voters are there, so 3 voters will vote, and then 3 choices are there. So like say here voters 1, 2 and 3, and choices that 3 choices that we are talking about, say A, B and C. So voter, assume these are the 3 possibilities, large 3 possibilities, and these broad possibilities from where we'll see that who is actually gaining from these particular preferences. Like say assume the case number 1 where voter 1 prefers A to B and B to C, and therefore A is very clearly for the voter 1 is the most preferred one. Voter 2 say voter 2 prefers C to A and A to B. So clearly voter 2 is giving more preference to C as compared to A and B. Likewise, voter C prefers voter 3 prefers B to C and C to A. So that's how the 3 broad 3 possibilities that we get it. So now if we look at from pairwise possibilities, assume we take A versus B. So if we see A versus B, the first voter, voter 1 and voter 2, clearly they give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 and voter 2 give more preference to C. So voter 1 on A as compared to B. Therefore, clearly A wins. Another one, pairwise. Assume A versus C. Here, voter 1 prefers A over C, but then voter 2 and voter 3, they prefer C over A. So that means from here C clearly wins. So now if we look at pair 1 and pair 2 is clearly between A and B, A wins, but between A and C, C wins. So from this particular preferences, from the preferences, C should be the social choices, right? So, and how? And how C is a social choice? Because between A and B, A wins, and between A and C, C wins. So people are actually preferring more C over A, and then people are preferring more A over B, and therefore C is basically, one can actually consider as C is a social choice from between these two. But then if we have pairwise 3, where we see B versus C, we see voter 1 prefers B over C and voter 3 prefers B over C. So clearly B wins. So although between pair 1 and pair 2, between A and C, C clearly a social choice. The moment we bring one more pairwise choice, like between B and C, there B wins. Then again it goes into the next. So we don't reach to any conclusive sort of result, and this is very ambiguous, and here no solutions that we see from the voting system from the public choice theory. Therefore, this is voting paradox, and this cyclical continuously it goes on and on and on. Whatever the permutation combination, you can actually do it from these 3 preferences, but pairwise when we do, then we don't get any conclusive conclusion from this particular systems of the voting, and therefore in the public choice it's very difficult to reach at any sort of conclusion. So now then we move to the next important topic, what is popularly known as Arrow's impossibility theorem. And Arrow is like Kenneth Joseph Arrow, who also received Nobel Prize in 1972. And from Arrow's impossibility theorem, that we we get certain characteristics of these choices and the preferences on which we can actually defend or we can make better voting system, where we can also explain that how voting paradox is actually happening, and one certain characteristics if we can actually keep in our mind, then we can actually move out from the voting paradox dilemma. So this endless cycle of voting or the pairwise voting, it is absolutely very unsatisfactory state of the affairs, which does not lead to any conclusive voting structure. And then what are the Arrows talks about these 4 characteristics, which actually gives a bit of explanations like how we can actually overcome from this voting paradox. So the first is transitivity, that we know. So in voting paradox, there is no preference like A to B, B to C, and then it was not like one preference, but then voter 2 can have B prefer B over C and A. But then if we follow transitivity rule, and that becomes a uniform in the election, and therefore preferences and priority areas for different policies are very important for voters, and therefore listing for the preferences is very important. Which one will be given more preference? If somebody says like I want to give equal preferences if I win, equal preference to all the choices or all the options, like for instance schools, primary school, health and cleaning, cleaning, drinking water, clean drinking water, and all three choices are given equal weightage, it becomes very confusion, and that might lead to voting sort of paradox. But then if we follow transitivity, what does that mean? Transitivity rule says clearly that A is preferred to B and B is preferred to C. Therefore, A should be preferred to C. There is no further discussion on that. Like who are preferring what and others are preferring what. So it's basically what we are saying, like A is more preferred than B and B is more preferred than C, and therefore this is clearly A is preferred than C. So without this property we can get into cyclical voting. For instance, the example that we had given, like say water and primary school and say primary health, if all are equally preferred, then that pair-wise voting problem will be there. But if we give water more preference over public health and then primary school, and then therefore it is very clear that water will be preferred than primary school, and therefore this might lead to certain sort of conclusive outcome from the voting system. The second point is non-dictatorial choice, like in a democratic state of affairs or in society. A meaningful political system or mechanism must ensure that outcomes do not simply reflect the preferences of the single individual or single elite or single interest group. So that is one thing. If that is there, so individual preferences will not be treated individual wise, and all the individuals in the society will be given equal weightage, then this problem will not be there, like voting paradox will not be there. So each one of them will be treated equally. The third point is the independence of irrelevant alternatives. Like for instance, the outcome should be independent of irrelevant alternatives. So alternative could be anything. So if water and clean water and beautification of the villages, if these two are there as one of the choice of the basket, then definitely water is more essential than beautifications or beautification of the village. So water will be more preferred, and therefore this particular alternative of beautification of the village should not be there for the people to even think twice even before going for the vote. So basically this particular characteristic says that we should try to remove irrelevant alternatives as much as possible, and therefore we get the main preferences for which voting can be taken place or voting decision can be made. The fourth one is unrestricted domain. The mechanism must work. This particular mechanism must work regardless of the set of preferences. So we actually also have to think about that, like unrestricted domain that should be defined, and therefore set of preferences, even one has set of preference that actually must work. I mean, without even if we don't actually define the set of preferences, if we clearly define the domain, then definitely domain of any policy, then certainly there should not be any problem from the voting point of view. So now what Arrow's says. So Arrow's theorem says there is no social decisions or voting rule that converts individual preferences into consistent aggregate decision without either, like two things that Arrow's theorem talks. The first one is restricting preferences. So we should not be given proper preferences or imposing dictatorship on the policy and also on the preferences. So if these two are maintained, then definitely some sort of decision can be made, and then as an outcome from the voting voting system that we get, we can also come out from the voting paradox, and overall social decision or voting decision can be made. So now there are a couple of issues in the single peak and double peaked preferences. Sometimes it has one preference, sometimes it has double preferences, and there we actually get stuck. So we can actually do it from the graph that we had drawn, couple of graph that we had illustrated in our last class. So here say government expenditure or quantity of public goods. So and then on the vertical axis we can actually consider like utility, and say one more, you can also draw utility, and here again government expenditure. So if we consider this, like utility increases as government expenditure increases, or quantity of public goods will be more demanded if utility is increasing. So here is very clear, there is single peak. So here it's like A is single peak. Then another one situation where we see here, say point B, again it is a single peak in terms of preference. But if we look at this particular case, here is a double peak, like say here A, C and D. So A and B certainly is a single peak, so there is no issue of that in terms of utility and government expenditures concern. But then of course in panel 3, like if we can name this as panel 1, panel 2 and this is panel 3. So in panel 3 we can clearly see like at point C there is a single peak, and then it goes down, and then at point D again we see single peak in terms of preference, like in terms of utility. Utility is high and as government expenditure increases. So at this particular point, like say at G2 level or G1 level, so OG amount of government expenditures, utility we see highest utility, like say U star, and again at OG2 level utility again reaches at the highest level. So which one is the optimum level of the preference, whether it is C or B? So question is C or D, which points that is giving highest level of utility. But at C there is a less amount of or less demand for the quantity demanded for the public goods, that means less government expenditures. At OG2 level is like high, level of or demand for public goods is much more higher, and therefore OG2 amount of government expenditures is much more higher than OG amount. But then at D point we get again highest level of utility. So certainly panel 3 is very confusing, where double peaks, and it is from the public choice point of view, it is a confusion, and there is no conclusive solution here. But then panel A and panel 1 and panel 2 is very clearly there is a single point, single peak that we get, where we know that OG star amount of total government expenditure that can be spent to get the highest level of utility. So these are a problem that in public choice we face. So now one of the ways in which we can also address this or arrest this is like median voter theorem. It's just like medium income distributions. So when we get the two kind of double peaks or two kind of situations, then we just average them and then we try to make it. Like what does median voter theorem says? It states that majority voting will yield the outcome preferred by the median voter if preferences are single peaked, right? The median voter are those whose taste are in the middle of the set of voters. So an equal number of other voters prefer more and prefer less of the public public goods. Is basically the two extreme. If we get that, and then we get, some voters, they will actually kind of choose between two alternatives. It's just not just between A and B. It is not like A and B. If there are three electoral parties there, and then two parties are very powerful, and then third one is like, for instance, Green Party, or say those who are actually new emerging party. But at a point, like median voters will actually get overwhelmed or get confused by different preferences or promises given by two opposition, like two strong oppositions. So sometimes the third one who is little weaker than say A and B, then that particular option 3 or say the third party might win. So in certain cases, so those are the median voter kind of theorem, and the solution that one can actually get it when single peak and different preferential problems are observed. So now Lindell equilibrium that we talk about. So what does that mean? Lindell equilibrium is Eric Lindell's pricing strategy. Is the level of government expenditure at which collective demand. So collective demand curve is the vertical sum of individual demands, and then market demand that we learn is market demand is the horizontal summation of the individual demands. But here Lindell equilibrium, it talks about vertical summation of the individual demands, and thus constructed intersects the supply curve, and at the intersection the sum of the tax prices equals the supply curve. So let us understand this with the graphical illustration. So here say individual A, and here vertical axis is the price, or here it could be tax. In case of price we can also write tax, like price of tax, and here is like say government expenditure or demand for the public goods. And then we have another one plot for person B, where on the horizontal is like a horizontal axis is again government expenditures or demand for the public goods. On the vertical axis it is the price of the tax. So we get how we get Lindell equilibrium. So we will calculate. So suppose person A, this is the demand curve, and say this is the price, like say P1, and here again demand curve, say downward sloping, which is DB, and here say at OG star amount of public expenditure, we get P2 level of price. So Lindell equilibrium says is a vertical summation of the price like OP1 and OP2. This will get summed up, and then here say set P star, which is P1 plus P2. So demand curve will be this, where supply curve meet at a point, say at point E, where vertical summation of the price like P1 and P2 at the given OG star amount of the public expenditures. So total government expenditures or total public expenditure will be the same for all the persons, because that is a given, that is a market will decide that much of public expenditure will take place. But then that can be demanded by various individuals. But then price that differential prices that we have seen that for person A is a different price like OP1, and for person B is a price is a different like OP2. But then if we sum it up, then the total price will be determined as the overall price for the public goods determinants, like here OG amount of public expenditures, like total demand for the public goods. So this is what we call Lindell equilibrium, and this is what the supply curve here. So we can also can draw here, this is a supply curve for A, and this one is supply curve for B, and this one is for the, say, in society or in the market. So this is what we know about Lindell equilibrium. This is also very important in context of public policy frame. So I will stop here, and these are the two references again I have used for this particular lecture, and I hope you enjoyed, and I see you in my next class. Thank you very much.